Afternoon. Good afternoon. Were you all here for this morning's incredible panel? If you're working, raise your hand or clap. Okay, awesome, 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 awesome. Well, in case there's some new people here, I'm going to do a bit of an introduction all over again. Good afternoon. Welcome to CAAM. My name is Alexandra Mitchell. I oversee education and public programs here at CAAM, as well as being the co-founder of our inaugural CAAMCon Festival, which you're here for today. So thank you for coming. We're so delighted that you're here with us for the afternoon, for the long haul. I'm going to go through the thank yous again because I can't thank people enough for today. It's very much so a group effort. I want to thank our staff, our docents, directors, vendors, custodians, engineers, food trucks, talent, management staff, and of course our co-founder, our incredible co-founder, and just a great partner in crime, John Jennings. So big thank you to everybody. If you haven't already, I invite you to get a limited edition run of our CAAMCon t-shirt, which is on sale at the iDesk right there behind you. Today's conversation featuring CAAMCon co-founder John Jennings, professor, New York Times bestselling author and graphic novelist, joined by Cody Ziglar, director, podcast producer, and Marvel She-Hulk attorney at law and Spider-Punk series writer. Yes, we love that. And executive producer of the Boondocks, Rodney Barnes, for a wide-ranging conversation about creating and working with characters that are staples in Black comics, representations of Black women characters, and adapting the work of writers like Octavia Butler to graphic novel form. Sebastian A. Jones is the president of Stranger Comics, and he'll be moderating the panel for us this afternoon. As I just mentioned, Sebastian A. Jones is the president of Stranger Comics and the creator of The World of Asunda, including the lead character Niobe, excuse me if I pronounced that incorrectly, which became the first nationally distributed comic with a Black female author, artist, and lead hero in history. Yes. At Stranger, Jones partnered with Garcelle Bouvier on I Am book series, a children's book that focuses on diversity, and has co-written the psychological thriller video game Hector. After working with Prentice Penny at HBO, Jones recently partnered with Penny to create Payback Entertainment, where they will produce comics, TV shows, and films on BIPOC community creators and creations, which will be produced through Stranger. He's written and published so many titles, so I could be up here talking about it forever, but just to be brief, I want to mention The Unnamed: A Sniper's Prayer, The Untamed: Killing the Floor, and Untamed: Still a Fool, among many others. John Jennings is a professor, author, and graphic novelist and curator, a Harvard Fellow, and as I mentioned, a New York Times bestseller, as well as an Eisner winner and all-around champion of Black culture. As a professor of media and cultural studies at the University of California, Riverside, not far from here, Jennings examines the visual culture of race in various media forms, including film, illustrated fiction, comics, and graphic novels. He is also the director of Abrams Comics, imprint Megascope, which publishes graphic novels focused on the experience of people of color. His research interests include the visual culture of hip-hop, Afrofuturism politics, visual literacy, horror, and the ethno-Gothic, and the speculative design and its applications of visual rhetoric. John Jennings is the co-editor of the 2016 Eisner Award-winning collection, The Blacker the Ink, Construction of Black Identity in Comics and Sequential Art, and co-founder and organizer of the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture's Black Comic Festival in Harlem, where my former colleagues are. He is co-founder and organizer of MLK NorCal's Black Comics Arts Festival in San Francisco, and also SoCal, the Black and Brown Comics Expo at Ohio State University. John is all over doing this work. Veteran award-winning screenwriter and producer Rodney Barnes has established himself as a Hollywood mainstay with his vibrant, emphatic voice and producing expertise, securing him an overall deal with HBO in September of 2020. From Adult Swim's Boondocks to Hulu's Wu-Tang and American Saga, Barnes has displayed versatility across a variety of genres in the industry's largest and most influential programs. Barnes is currently the executive producer for HBO's Showtime series. He's also formed Zombie Love Studios, a graphic novel production studio that will both produce and create original graphic novels published through Amazing Comics Publishing. Barnes Publishing Company, currently he writes Philadelphia for Image Comics and is scheduled to release 3 new titles through Image Comics in spring of 21. Already has. During his work on the Boondocks, he also served as co-executive producer and writer on Chris Rock's TV series Everybody Hates Chris from 2005 to 2009, which he won an American Film Institute Award for and was nominated for a Writers Guild Award, America Award. He's done so much other incredible work, I had to leave some of it out, And last but certainly not least, Cody Ziglar is an Emmy-nominated LA-based writer, director, and podcast producer. He currently writes for Futurama and Marvel Comics. He has also written for She-Hulk, as I mentioned, Attorney at Law, Rick and Morty, Robot Chicken, and Craig of the Creek. He's produced podcasts for Earwolf, How Stuff Works with iHeartRadio, and UCB Comedy, and directed videos on Funny or Die, Cracked, Woo Ha Ha, and many more. Without further ado, I'd like to present our panelists. Thank you so much.
Hey everybody. How you guys doing? All right? Is this like this? Hello. Drop an octave. So you heard who we put up the mic like this? Yeah, like this. I feel like this. No, I'll take it off. Yeah, all right. Fair enough. You heard our introductions. You probably don't know who's who. So hello, I'm Sebastian.
I'm John Jennings, co-founder of this event.
I'm Rodney Barnes, writer.
I'm Cody Ziglar.
So I thought what we would do to start off with is I'm going to ask these incredible creators how would you define a hero? How would you define a hero? And then second follow-up question, how would you define a villain?
That's hard.
Glad
I
you
wrote
first.
stuff
You
down.
go
Yeah,
on,
bro.
you first.
It's you first, bro.
You're the
Okay.
professor.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That's difficult. In some way, from a literary standpoint, the hero is kind of like the protagonist, the center of the story. But I think in general, a hero is someone who is compelled to do the right thing, dealing with like whatever odds or what have you. Yeah, I mean, basically, it's not like a hero isn't afraid. I think a hero tries to do the right thing in spite of the fact that they're probably wrestling with all kinds of like what they think of are like inadequacies or what have you, but fighting against that inner fear to do what's right regardless. And of course, like the villain, and which is very difficult, right? Because the villain is always someone who is a hero in their own minds, but it's kind of like pushing back against whatever social norms we think are, that are kind of like the system that they're working through. So a lot of times I think the villain, look at like a character like the Joker. Joker doesn't think he's a villain, but he's in conjunction, he's in diametrically opposed to the values of a particular given societal system, I think. How about that?
Yeah, sounds good. Do you guys have any other kind of like anything to add or?
I wish I had as elegantly stated thesis on heroes and villains as John does, but for me it's always someone up against some type of great obstacle, and it could be as big as I have to fight Thanos or whatever, or it could be I have to get to school or go to work so I can pay for school and help my family out or whatever that is. For me, the villain is whatever that obstacle is, whether it's a galaxy-destroying warmonger or it's just capitalism and trying to live in a society where maybe you're not the one necessarily valued. So like it makes it easier for me to find that sort of human connection, because for me, I think stories come from the human element first. Like I think it's really hard for you to care about the spectacle if you don't care about the person that's going through the spectacle. And that's how I sort of resonate with the idea of like the hero and a villain.
You guys left me nothing to say.
That's my intention.
I'll try. Thank you. I didn't think you were going to jump in and say something different than he said to make it even better. I think a hero is someone who overcomes themselves in order to do the right thing. I think there's a intrinsic dynamic within that they have to overcome, and then they do the right thing. I think the villain may have that same dynamic, but sees the world from a different point of view. In a similar sense, they may not, as John was alluding to, a villain may not see themselves as a villain. I think it's like in Star Wars where you have the Jedi and the Sith. I don't think the Sith see themselves as bad per se. They just embrace the dark side of themselves.
Right.
They stole everything. That's the best I got.
And I'll just add, to me, I think a hero is someone that dares to be vulnerable in an otherwise kind of cruel and objective world. If you can dare to fight against your own sensitivities, your own vulnerabilities, and you can overcome those anxieties, just sometimes a heroic movement is just getting out of bed and being able to take one step and one step at a time. Were there any kind of heroes in your life, whether it's personal or superficial, or characters that inspired you and that you really just truly resonated with when you were growing up, that created some kind of turning point in your lives?
I think as a kid, it was like the superficial one, as far as like, this is just what I got from media or the art or whatever, was like I'm from the South, North Carolina, a very small rural town. Like we didn't have cable or AC or any of that stuff growing up, so everything we got was just from the bunny ears or VHS tapes that my dad had. So like, I remember one time my dad sat me down, I was like, Cody, you're gonna love this, you gotta watch this. I was like, okay, and he puts on like Enter the Dragon, and I was like, oh, this is dope as hell. This is dope. Like Bruce Lee is getting busy, but also like Jim Kelly was in. I was like, oh wow, we can do this. Like I didn't know this is what we could do. And he's like, yeah, this is what we can do. And like that was like my first superficial like sort of hero inspiration. But like the sentimental real answer is that like my parents were very very influential in me. I grew up in a place where traditionally like people that look like me didn't get to do the stuff that I do, but also they weren't in a place where their family would support that. I come from a family that really cared about the arts, writing, drawing, whatever. They were always very supportive of that, and they also let me created a home environment where that could foster, and I could sort of be the person that looks like I look like right now. They were always very supportive of that. And like my mother was a very big hero for me. She's no longer with us, she passed this year, but she was also someone that I always went to in my darkest moments and in my brightest moments. So like whenever I think of like a true hero, like what good I want to leave the world, like what my record would be, it's definitely something that would inspire them, but also hopefully leave the world a little bit kinder than when I left. So like I always think of them in my moments of need or darkness.
How about you, Rodney?
Okay.
Good job.
Well, obviously I'm a massive Doctor Who fan. That was one of my first, as far as like popular culture heroes, it's still one of my favorite characters. Just a brilliant character. I feel that that flexibility is built into. I love this idea of flexibility, but also I love the fact that for the most part the Doctor was like attempting to be nonviolent, but also utilize intellect instead of violence to solve problems. And now, of course, Doctor Who's about to become a black man for the first time in 60 years or whatever, or something like that. So I love characters that actually look more like trickster characters in general. But I want to say, not to be cliche, but myself, I actually also grew up in a very agrarian southern space. I'm from Mississippi originally, and I grew up. We couldn't afford the OR and poor. It was like Poe, and. So I grew up in a space where my imagination was like the way for me to kind of deal with those particular spaces, And my grandfather was probably my first superhero. He didn't say a lot. He just worked very hard to support us, and I miss him greatly. And but he was like probably my first like real life hero. It's a small black man. He couldn't read or write, but knew the value of education and made sure that I got a great education, And so all I did is like, one of my degrees is dedicated to him,
I think for me, I'd say my grandmother, when I was a kid, she would tell me stories about how she wasn't encouraged to read. She was never really allowed to go to school. She grew up in a time where, I'm from Annapolis, Maryland, a time of doing really, really harsh segregation, where really as soon as she was old enough to work, she worked. So, that was probably her turning up. All right, and so she didn't want me to tell this story. And so she used to bring me, she was a domestic, and she used to bring me comic books from her work, because comic books were a disposable sort of entertainment back in the day when they were like a dime or 12 cents. They weren't meant to be collected. And she would bring them home to me, and she would encourage me to read. And anything that really would fire my imagination, when she saw that I loved comic books and movies and TV, she would sort of encourage me to stay on that path and what it could become, because she saw a possibility in me being able to do things that the limitations of her time and the world wouldn't really allow her to do. And so it sort of created an emotional connection to my imagination and being imaginative, and really opening up the door to it being a possibility, because I didn't know any writers growing up. I didn't know anybody who worked in a creative field. And her continuous push, because I had a lot of friends who were like, soon get a job as quickly as you can and play it safe. But because I had this woman who knew nothing about the world other than the fact that she wanted a better world for me, to push me, I would say she certainly was the first hero in my life.
I'm kind of curious to the folks that are out in the audience, do you guys, just show of hands, do you guys all read comic books? Right, okay, that's epic. Yeah. And then follow up real quick, do you guys read independent comic books outside of Marvel and DC?
Wow,
Thank you. That's good, that's really good, that's really good. Yeah, there's a slew of great independent creators out there that are well on their way and just create wonderful, wonderful stories for you to connect with.
Including yourself.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, you see the big sign out there with the big, pretty girl? That's me. That's not me literally, that's Naomi. Thank you, John. I was going to say that plug.
It's okay. I want to make sure.
I appreciate
Get your flowers.
So to follow up on the hero aspect, because I think it's really important. I'm sure there's a lot of aspiring writers out there and those types of things. So the next question is, in that moment, are you the writer who hides within your heroes and villains? Do you live through them, or are they distant? And how do you find common ground?
I'll say, like, when I'm thinking about a story, and I always say this, like, the story is the first technology by how we understand the world. I mean, if you think about myth making, folk tales, they're a technology that are extensions of ourselves, you know, and so we make sense of the world. So it's like, instead of the sun being like the star, it's a chariot going across the sky with a guide and horse, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
So, and of course, over time, we realize that that's a story, that's a mechanism for us to understand our environment. And so, for me, the other thing is, like, storytelling is a type of problem solving, you know? So if I have an issue or something I want to learn about, I'll create an avatar to a certain degree, the hero, to explore that particular thing. For instance, Blue Hand Mojo, which is a character I created, I was interested in the Great Migration from Mississippi to Chicago. So I created a character that would explore that particular aspect. So I created a vehicle to a certain degree to try to understand that. And then, you know, when you're creating a character, you want to make sure that there's, you know, quirks and foibles and things of that nature. And I think a lot of times when you create a villain, you're really trying to create like an antithesis, someone that responds to constructions that are inside the character themselves. I mean, if you look at like Batman's Rogues Gallery, there's different aspects of Batman, you know? Yeah, so that's kind of how I think about it. I think about it as a kind of an extension of myself.
Is that for villains and the heroes? Do you think
Yeah,
that on
yeah,
the villains,
yes.
do you find that other side to you?
Yes, I definitely think that there's, that when you're creating a villain, that you're also kind of like tapping into things that are inside yourself that are kind of like pushing back against societal norms, so to speak, you know? So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. I think definitely more so recently with what I've been making has definitely been more of myself implanted in. Like, I come from comedy, so like I've always been like my point of view when it came to like a sense of humor and stuff. But I think specifically with Miles Morales, it's like now that I'm 35, like I remember when he came out when I was, I guess, 24 or 25. And I was like, oh, this is, I see why, like if I was like a 16-year-old kid, I see how important this would be.
Right.
And I remember going through the stuff that he goes through when I was that age, and now that I'm 35 and like I'm a little bit more cognizant and emotionally matured, and like I can sort of process those things because I like to think I'm a pretty emotionally in tune, emotionally healthy, smart adult. Or at least I hope that's how I come off. I can like, there's sometimes he just fools on conversations that like I've had with myself, or and the issue that came out literally this week, like it's a conversation that I have had with my parents, and you know, conversation that I would love to continue to have with my parents. You know, my family, like I said, has always been a very sort of rock for me, which I'm sure is not uncommon for a lot of people in this room, but like particularly for my mother. And like there's definitely just 2 full pages that Miles says what I would like to say to her if she were still here. And you know, that's like the very dour, like sad, dramatic version of the things. But also, like, yeah, I've written characters where like you can see me, like I very obviously was a punk kid growing up. Like I've written characters that were just punk versions of characters that I liked growing up. They say the things that I say to my friends. They say the dumb jokes that I say to my girlfriend, and it's very much a piece of myself put on that page, for better or for worse. So like there's always a piece of me that's going to be in a character, and even sometimes when I'm writing villains, like I think all of us have a little bit of that part of us that, as someone else said earlier today, like the best villains are the ones that are heroes in their own minds and you can resonate with. And there are definitely, I think, points of view where I can put those characters, like put those like maybe those darkness thoughts or those thoughts that maybe aren't as healthily thought out, that I can place in those characters and sort of work it out on the page. If hopefully if the book is good, like that's the process that I go through.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I started writing comics. I started writing television before comics, and I wasn't really able to personalize television in the same way I could with comics.
Right.
Maybe a little bit in Everybody Hates Chris, a little more in the Boondocks, but when I started writing independent comics, like Philadelphia, that was more Philadelphia is it's a vampire comic, but it came about because when my father passed away, I was estranged from my father, which is why my grandmother raised me. And I always wondered if we had had more time together, would our problems have been, would we have been able to solve our problems? And I was thinking, you know, vampires are immortal. You have all the time in the world. And so if my father could come back and we had all the time in the world, would we be able to solve our differences? And a lot of the book, the storytelling is cathartic. It's me exercising the arguments we had, the differences we had, trying to look at it and be empathetic from his point of view and not just look at it from my own. And so to answer the question, very personal, more so than anything else, to the point where it's hard for me to go back and do books that aren't personal anymore, because now when you're writing from a place that's intrinsic and empathetic and heartfelt, it's hard to go back to just do a story that you don't have any personal connection to, for me.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think, and it's even bled into more of the television work that I do now. I try to find myself within characters. I try to be more connected, more so than just trying to be plot-driven and telling a story.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Just to kind of piggyback on that, when we pitched HBO the World of Asunder, Niobe and so on, you know, we'd done a lot of studio interviews, and a lot of times when you go to these kind of executive type meetings, something like, so what's the demographic? And I go, I don't know, people like good shit. I know what they want me to say. Well, the demographic is this, but I'm not going to say that. But I had this one executive, and he said, "Can I ask you a question? Is the stranger you in the story of the Untamed?" And I was like, "Yes." You know, I felt so seen. You know, like he just stripped me down. I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Can I ask you? You know, he's my wanting to be a better man, and would I make a deal with the devil to do so? Can I get back to my family? Can I right these wrongs and so on?" And he says, "Can I ask you something else? Is Niobe you?" And I was like, "Yes." She's my hope to be a better person, and the struggle of the duality of spirit I wrestle with, and also being mixed, and all those kind of like conflicty things that I've grown up with. And so it's like, I want to work with this executive because he just saw me as me, right, and then could then nurture and help me develop the stories, you know, and these characters in a very kind of true human way, you know. So yeah, that's appreciate that. Just to kind of jump into the process for the writers out there, can you share a little bit about what your process is in creating a hero, and how do you discover the cultural heritage that hero has? And how does that affect your storytelling? You know, it's like, you know, when a lot of folks are like, what are you guys giggling? Is it, you've already had this question?
No. He's just looking at me like, you know you're about to answer first, right? That's what that was. He's like...
Because, you know, it's like a lot of times when I'm teaching and kids come on like, oh, I want them to be black, or I want to be brown, or I want to be from England. Well, why? And then within the why, how do you discover who that person truly is? You know, and that can then lead into the whole concept of, you know, can and why Superman be black, and then how does that affect, et cetera, et cetera. But just to start with your process in creating a hero and or a character, and the importance of the weight of the cultural heritage within that character.
Okay. Well, I mean, so to a certain degree, I mean, the character is, again, the vessel by which you explore the world you've created and the themes that you've created, right? And so I guess you have to figure out, like, you know, without being overly tropey, you know, in whatever genre you're working in, like, how do I actually do something different with this character that represents, again, the discovery process, you know? Like, for instance, we have a book that Bill Campbell put out for us for Rosarium called Box of Bones. I always pitch it as, like, Afrocentric Hellraiser. That's my elevator pitch, right? But the main character is a black queer woman from the South who is what I call the seeker character. You know, if you read any H.P. Lovecraft or what have you, there's always a character that's extremely erudite, well educated, that is the discovery character. Some people like ourselves probably like it's the Kolchak character, right? It's just a Night Stalker character to be like, not to date myself, but it's just like the character has this unending need to learn, you know, that kind of thing, or to find out the truth about the world, you know. And I think that's the heart of the character. And then you kind of like think about the intersectional aspects of like, okay, well, this woman is also from the South. She's a woman, but she's also a queer woman. And then so how are we actually thinking about these mechanics that are creating different aspects of her, and how does that change her journey, so to speak, right? And so those are the things I'm thinking about. So Box of Bones is about, you know, it was inspired by the fact that social injustice still happen to African Americans and people in the diaspora every day. And there's not been real justice in some ways with various cases. And so basically what happens is the box punishes those who won't let that happen, right? But it's also about the differences between justice and revenge. You know, how much of yourself do you give up for revenge, you know? And what does it mean when that eats at you, you know? And so we slowly see our character Lindsay, who is a vehicle for that, go through those stages, but also carrying all the different multiple identities with her. So of course, with any character, you're doing research. You know, you need to get into the character's head and understand, how would I work through this? And sometimes it'd be like vignettes, sometimes I do charrettes, you know, of like how I'm, you know, even talking to myself as far as like language goes, as far as like how would she sound, you know, that kind of thing. But you have to get into the mindset and actually do your research if it's a culture that you're not, that you don't understand. So for instance, like if you are writing about someone who's gay, you go and talk to your gay friend. And then you talk to your other gay friend.
You don't explore, John?
not right now.
Okay.
Not right now. You talk to your other gay friend, right? But if you only have one gay friend, then perhaps you should not be writing that story. You see what I'm saying? So, yeah. But not right now.
Oh man, you're giving me the look like I gotta follow that great example.
I mean, it's his fault. He was like...
I've been lucky that I've come in. I've also came from television to comic books, so like, you know, one of the beauties of a television is that you're in a room with a bunch of different people. Like I've been lucky to work on shows where a lot of the people in the room look like me, or they just straight up weren't white, which is a blessing. Like my first TV show was this show called Craig of the Creek, and the show is just about a little, The show, for those of you who don't know, it's just a little black boy who goes to the creek with his friends, and every different type of person is at that creek because the people that worked on the show, the writers, the animators, the people just on staff were just straight up like not white. The two showrunners were white, but everyone else was like different types of black, like Southern black, Northern black, like Filipino black, Chinese and black, Jamaican, like every different type of like black and brown person represented there. So like you just had this universe where like you could create stories that were from your culture. And even on She-Hulk, like the room, like there were two men in the room, me and another guy, but everyone else in the room were basically black women. So like that's just what I was used to. So like, I'm used to coming to a space where like, oh, like this is comfortable. Like I can tell these stories. Like I'm in a place where we can share and swap these stories. So like coming into like comic book forum, where like, yes, we know that Miles has to be black and Puerto Rican. It's like I can cover the black stuff. Like I can't speak as an expert on like his Puerto Rican side, but I can try my best for the black stuff. But like he's also in New York City. Like there's a great offering. Like there's a lot of different type of people in New York City. And I just started thinking like, yeah, I remember how cool it was to see Miles when he first came out. Like I would like to create characters that look like my friends and my family. Like the whole process that I think of when I create these stories is like, yeah, I create this character and then they appear whatever they do, what they need to do in my run. And when I'm done, someone from that actual culture who's an expert can take that character and build it up the same way that people have built up Miles. Like Miles was created by Michael Bendis, fantastic comic book creator, writer. He's not black, but he's made some great stories, like Salina Men, who took over, another fantastic writer. He's not black, but they told really great stories with Miles with the confines of like the experiences they could, and I'm trying to tell those stories as a black person, and I hope that the characters I can create can be taken truthfully. Like I just make characters because I know that hopefully people from those cultures can like write these characters and then get a check. Like that's ultimately my end goal whenever I create a character. Like I want to get more people that aren't white, straight and white into comic books, and then when they get their TV shows or movies, all the people can get into those rooms as well.
I think for me, it is always start with culture. I currently write and produce a show called Winning Time about the Lakers on HBO. And thank you. And one of the things, I'm not blessed to have the multicultural groups you've been in.
I've been very lucky.
I have another group. It's just one group. And so, and I'm in another group. So a lot of the lifting for me initially was saying that, black isn't like just one thing.
Right.
And so oftentimes it's geographical. And
right.
so if you have like Magic Johnson, who's from Lansing, Michigan, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is from Harlem, and Spencer Haywood, who's from the Deep South, that's three different ways of looking at America, three different entry points. And so oftentimes it comes down to really either finding people who can create a sense of empathy into how those people may have thought and felt. If you can't read their books and find other things, you just have to be able to create a bridge to say, what must that have been like to come from that experience to now being in LA in a group of people trying to accomplish a goal. And so building that into the comic book space, I usually start with humanity first. How does the person, this human being, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, or how do they see the world? And how do they fit emotionally into the world? And then when it comes to specificity, if that character is a woman, I try to run it by the group of women, or whatever group that person comes in, falls under. I try not to use my own understanding,
Right.
because I think that's a trap to think I know everything about every other group and how people feel. I try to find as much of a diverse group of voices to come in and give life to that thing and kind of check me on whether or not I'm following in a place that feels real. And certainly now, unfortunately, I'm getting to an age where I don't understand anything 20 years old and under. So now I even have to talk to my own kids and say, what do you think about this? Because the values change and the world changes and the perspective changes. Of course, it's better when you're older, but it's a unique opportunity to be able to connect with other human beings and see how the world works beyond your own singular experience. So there you go.
That's great.
Yeah, a lot of times, people come to my booth at comic conventions, this giant banner of Niobe, and so a lot of times the first question I get asked is, are you, I don't know how to say this, are you a brother? And I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of like a more of a distant cousin, I would say. So then it comes to the questions of like when you're creating these kind of characters that aren't from necessarily your walk of life or your gender and so on. So I think these are just all like excellent answers. For me, creating Niobe, it was an interesting one. That was a character that kind of came to me when I was probably about 14, 15. I was in the boarding house in England. And back there, this was 35, 40 years ago or something, and I might as well have been Haitian, it was a lot of like fisticuffs, right? And so I think I was creating these characters to essentially, especially Niobe, this character, I think I romanticized about an angelic type character that could take all of my inhibitions and my vulnerabilities onto her winged shoulders, and also my wrath. And as I grew, she kind of grew with me. And the world kind of grew around to the world I was building. And also just on a fundamentally, I was just being a very logical kid. And this is not meant to be offensive or anything. Everyone's a bit sensitive these days. But it's like when I was young, I remember being at school and I just asked the question, excuse me, sir, why is God a man? That doesn't, like just being 8 years old, you're like, Jones, you can't answer that question, get out, So for me, I was kind of philosophically or just spiritually, it just made the most sense to me that this matriarchal character that I had envisioned would be a woman that could essentially take care of me and then build the worlds that I wanted to see, and then you know, and here we are, you know. So yeah. Yeah, you can clap. It's all right. So when you're, I mean, it's a bit of a follow-up, and you know, maybe you guys have kind of said it. When you're creating specifically, and you know, John, you're doing Octavia Butler's comic. When you're creating black women characters, how do you find them within? And when you're creating black women characters, do you feel the weight of extra responsibility?
I think your first responsibility is always to be true to how you feel the story is supposed to unfold, and also be respectful of your audience and the characters. So definitely there's a lot of responsibility. I think that black women are amazing, you know, so that's in every level. And it's always been, I have a sense of ease as far as like thinking about it, just how wonderful a black female character can be, black woman character can be. So I don't know, I mean, dealing with Octavia Butler's work though, I mean, she was incredible genius, you know, and every word that she wrote was perfect, you know? And what I mean by that is like her editorial process was like creating diamonds. It was like she went through so many edits of her work. So one of the main things I think for me and my friend Damien, who adapted the work, was to listen, try to understand like how she was constructing these characters. We look at her as a collaborator, you know, and also to think about how do we get out of the way, you know, how do we get out of the way. So when you're adapting something, you know, to adapt means to change, right? I mean, that's literally what it means. So when you're dealing with different mediums, you know, different mediums have different affordances, different things that you can do. There's things that comics do that film doesn't do, right? And what you have to understand is like, how does that change how you're entering into the character, right? But yeah, I think, yes, there's definitely a level of respect, there's a level of understanding, and understanding how people are going to respond as well, you know? So yeah, I think it wasn't the difficult way, the different thing for me for adapting that story was to edit Octavia Butler. That was very daunting, you know? But other than that, it's just like shut up, listen, utilize our skills to actually try to create a window from from the prose story to the comics medium. So,
thank you.
He's giving me a look. I got to follow that up. You know, it's not too dissimilar from what you just said. Everything I write is in the reverence of the black women in my life. My aunts, my uncle, my sisters, my mother, and my grandmothers. I feel like in the shorthand, like culturally, like the idea of like a strong woman has always been like she wears like a leather jacket and drinks brown liquor. And like that's definitely like a type of strength, but like growing up and seeing like just how much my grandparents had to sacrifice to like make sure like my mother like finished school, because again, we're from the country when you turn like 20 and you can like, or 12, you can like work the fields. Like, yeah, like why are you gonna read more books? Like that's not gonna put money on our table. So like truly like seeing what they sacrificed to get not only like my mom, but all my mom's brothers and sisters, and on my dad's side, his brothers and sisters, to get to places where they could then make me sacrifice so I could get to where I'm get to. Like it's always comes from that place. So like a lot of it is definitely a love letter to things that they've gone through, and you know, I make stuff that I hopefully like my younger sisters can see. I'm like, oh wow, this is great. Like this person looks like me. The first thing I ever wrote, I put like whatever Spider-Man saves like a dark-skinned black woman with natural hair. I wanted to take it and show it to my sister Rihanna. Like, hey, this is you. She even has the gap in her teeth like you have. And like that's always like there's power that I get from that. You know, everyone knows the saying, like, you know, your ancestors' wildest dreams and stuff, but truly, like, when my dad was growing up, like, he was a sharecropper. They made 20 cents on the dollar for tobacco. And one day he came to me when I was like 5 or 6. He had just he had gone from that to like working in like a driving forklifts for like a steel wire spot, and he came in, he's like, this shit sucks. He just said, he's like, Cody, this shit sucks. Don't tell your mom I'm saying this, but like, shit sucks. He was like, every day I get up and I break my back and it's the worst thing on the planet. I'm just going to go to school. And he was like, you know, I've learned my lesson that like it's much easier to like break your brain than it is to break your back. Like it's so much easier being mentally exhausted than like being physically drained, where like I can't even hug my son. And my mom was the exact same way. So like everything that I write is from that place of like, wow, they did so much for me. Like there's no way that I could write something where like they're not going to be held in absolute reverence. Every day I wake up and I write, and I want a world where like they can see themselves, and like then they can tell the stories they want to. Like being in a place where I have that power and privilege is something that I'm very respectful of, and I am very blessed to be able to do it every single day.
Yeah, for me, I think I had a unique experience when I started to write comics, and I have a lot of daughters. And I had my comic book sitting on my desk one day, and my daughters picked up a book and started flipping through and said, oh, this is cool, but where are the girls? And I thought about it, and I didn't have any prominent women in Philadelphia in the beginning because it was about a father and a son.
Right.
And so I thought about it, and I created a character, Nita Hawes' Nightmare Blog, with the main character, Nita Hawes, is a black woman, a professor. And really in honor of my daughters, who kind of pulled my coat to something I wasn't even really thinking about. And so I think one of the most exciting things about the moment that we're in, when you look at Wakanda Forever, and you look at the Woman King, and you look at all of these American gods, Yetide Badaki and Bilquis, and for me, for American gods. Sure. And you look at all of the fantasy that's coming from female voices, and I think hopefully we can get more women into those roles as writer and producer and director, and be able to control the narrative. Because the thing that is most frustrating to me oftentimes is you'll have black women in the role, but they don't think or speak in a way that feels authentic, because you don't have those people writing those words and putting those thoughts into their mind for television. I don't know how much that's the case in comics, but I think the world is changing. I think it's changing for the better, and I think it's a great thing.
To piggyback on what Rodney was saying, so when I created this character, Niobe, she first appears in this book, The Untamed. But I wanted to make sure for the first Niobe book, I wrote with a young black girl of that age, in Amanda Stenberg. You probably remember she played Rue in the Hunger Games. And it was amazing. And a lot of it was just the age. Here I am trying to sound all like deep and melodramatic. And she's like, dude, she's 15. She's just not going to say that. Like there's a dead body. She goes, is he dead? And I'm like, oh, you're right. That's a great line for a 15-year-old to say. So some of the most honest, authentic, pieces of dialogue in Niobe comes from just having that opportunity to have those kind of collaborations. And thank you, and shouting out Yetide Badaki. We just signed a deal with her. If you go on Stranger Comics' Instagram, you'll see that I'm writing, co-creating with Yetide a wonderful new vampire comic called Niger Vamp. So it's a Nigerian vampire comic, and it's her creation, her idea, and it's amazing. So we're doing a comic and a show. So shout out to her
Congratulations.
as well. Yeah. Super exciting, and it is. I bring up the weight of responsibility in a real serious way in the comic space, because sometimes I go, oh, I'm a mixed bloke from England, and I'm writing these very culturally rich Afrocentric fantasy tales, and sometimes you hit. Every so often, there's a little bit of imposter, like why me, and why is the spirit choosing me to write these tales, and so when I'm doing these conventions, I would say I would say 2 to 10 times every convention that we have, a young girl will come up to the booth and they'll freak out seeing the Niobe comic book. And also shout out to the creator Aisha Sinclair, who has the Brown Sugar Fairies that we publish. And they flip out. And even more so, the elders that bring their grandchildren to the booth. And I would say 2 to 10 times we have them suddenly fall into tears. And it's quite it's incredibly humbling. And I take that with me, so every time I'm writing these stories, when I mean the weight of responsibility, and I see sometimes, and this kind of leads me to some of the other questions, sometimes, you know, and I don't want to be harsh on anybody, and when you see folks creating things that are like, oh, this is a hashtag trending, let me jump on this trend of insert black female character X, maybe I can get this picked up as a show. It kind of galls me to the point of, you know, what is the real reason and how much damage are you doing, and or are you elevated enough as a creator to kind of have the wherewithal that you're not taking this moment as seriously as potentially you need to be. So I think as, you know, creators that are creating certain characters, whether they're black or they're female, to the question I think Rodney, you know, talked about really, you know, importantly, is the cultural aspect is so everything to the way. So this brings me to this next question before I ramble on. What are your thoughts on black or brown? This, you guys, I'm sure have answered this a million times, but black or brown characters taking on pre-existing white characters. Does it help, as it gives more roles for actors and optics for fans who just want to see themselves as Superman, right? If you're 5 years old and you go, hey, oh, great, I can be Superman. You know, the 5-year-old isn't thinking about it. The parent might not be thinking about it, like, oh, great, my kid's Superman, cool. Or does it hurt, as these aren't oftentimes accompanied by the cultural changes that we need? They insert whoever's best. Like, you know, I like seeing racists upset. It's just kind of funny to me. So if you're like, oh, black James Bond, you can't have that. You know, he's inherent. I think that's hilarious when the racists get a bit in their knickers about it. But at the same token, I don't necessarily want to see a black man being a misogynistic chauvinist. I kind of want to keep that reserved for the white Englishman. The irony. Can we have a 006? Can we create a character from whole cloth? Right? And then, of course, the studios don't necessarily want to risk their billion-dollar franchise on. I'll let the panelists, John is itching
Cody,
to dive in. Go for it.
No, Cody, you should probably.
I'm going to do Rodney's headlock like that.
You know, if it's hard it's hard for me to care about the plight of like a straight white dude getting recasted in anything, truthfully.
Sure.
I think even just taking like that out of it, like just looking at like, you know, as Ryan Coogler was speaking to like earlier, like Namor, like in the comics he was like just a dude that had wings on his legs that was like honestly pretty racist looking, like it was very much written during like World War II. Just having a take on a character and be like, you know what, I'm going to take this character and meld it with like Mesoamericans, and like now this whole swath of like a culture gets like really, really fucking good representation. Also, they get a great character, like truly like a blank slate. We're gonna add all these things, and like I was talking with my girlfriend after we saw the movie that like I can't think of too many like major studio movies that release that have Yucatan Mayan as like 1/6 of the movie is just spoken straight up in that language. Like anytime Namor is in his homeland, like he's not speaking English, like he's not speaking Spanish, he speaks Spanish begrudgingly. Like it's very interesting to have that. So I think that you know, there's a lot of offering and like in taking these sort of blank characters and adding some new context and just some like new takes on it. Like you know, even like distilling down Superman, like it's a comic that I haven't read much of, but his whole thing is like anyone can have those virtues of being a good person. Like, that's just what Superman is about. Even taking out the fucking man part, excuse me, the man part of it, like, he could just be a good person that has virtue. Like, that's what it has, that's what it's about. Like, even with the Spider characters, Spider-Man or Spider-Woman, Spider-Gwen, Miles, Cindy Moon, like, it just, anyone, truly anyone can wear the mask. Like, that's the takeaway from, like, from the Spider-Verse, is like, you can take these characters and introduce some really, really interesting things into them by just taking from cultures that truly don't get a lot of representation. And I think that it's a very powerful offering, and like, I think that there have been some really cool things that people can add to that, even if you don't even dive into it that deeply. Like, just having like a dark-skinned black woman hold a lightsaber, it says so much more, has so much more of a political impact than like another white dude with like a high-top fade. Like, doesn't really do anything for us. So like, that's my sort of like long-winded answer. But yeah, I think there's a great offering into it, and like, I think it adds some you can have some really powerful moments derived from that, and have some really powerful impact in like culture and art in the mix of those two, if people make those decisions smartly and with respect.
I think if you're adding not just a black person or a woman into a costume that's familiar, but you're adding a culture and a world around them as well, the whole thing has to change. Right. It's like if you're dealing with, if you're saying that a black Superman is just another person from Krypton who happened to be black and came to the Earth and now has superpowers, what are the unique things that he has to deal with that Clark Kent doesn't have to deal with? If you're adding that element into the story. If John Stewart, the Black Green Lantern, has to deal with a different aspect of the world that's more personal to him and his culture, okay, cool. But if he's just there to say, we had 4 white people, we need 1 black one, then what's the point? I think it really, it has to service more than just the optics. Yeah. And I would love to be able to say, yeah, we could just create new characters, and we can, and I think that we should, but there is canon to be worked at the same thing, what you were just saying about the Ryan Coogler thing with Namor, and adding more. There are ways that you can creatively bring more dimension and scope to the world that was really single-minded back in the 40s and 50s. You can bring it into a current time now where now people are starting to have a voice and perspective. If you just look at the optics of it, I think it's a travesty. If you're able to create more scope to it, I think it's a great thing.
So, do you want to borrow this, bro?
Hello? Oh, can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think the first time I started thinking about like characters that were what they call race bending or gender bending or what have you, I didn't like it. I didn't think it was, I call them hand-me-down heroes, is what I call them. And I was like, I would always go for like new characters in different genres or what have you. But then I started seeing some characters that I felt were actually dialing into that cultural space a little bit more. A character like Mr. Terrific, for instance, who is a legacy character at DC Comics, is the smartest man, one of the smartest men in the DC universe. Or a character like Crimson Avenger, who is now a woman, a black woman. And I started seeing how like those shifts actually made those characters richer, And so I started slowly changing. So a character like Miles Morales, for instance, who I think is a spectacular character, right? But you have to bring those cultural artifacts into what makes Spider-Man Spider-Man, And I think if you're looking at like the superhero genre, there's this aspect of legacy characters that are actually kind of inherent in the characters. And I think what's happened now is that Marvel, for instance, has been around, 80 years now? And they're finally getting to the point where they're having legacy characters that just happen to be people of color. Before, we had like, a shift between, say, like Jay Garrick and Barry Allen, right? Was one of the first like legacy characters for the Flash. But now, of course, we have like a more diverse readership, hopefully, and you have to respect what's going on. I mean, Marvel's thing is like the world outside your window, right? How many windows do we have? Like, we need to look at the different windows. And as far as like racists and people who are pushing back against this stuff, well, there's a saying that states that to the privileged, equity feels like oppression. It's not going to ever, you know what I'm saying, to the privileged, equity feels like oppression. And so I'm like, yeah, I giggle at it. I'm like, okay, fine. And I'm not supporting a black James Bond either. I think let's do some other stuff. I want to see Luther before I see black James Bond. But anyway, that's my thing.
Apparently I have one more question to ask these gents, and then we'll turn it over to you guys. So last question, going through this, a bit of a different question. What was the best note you ever received from a producer or an editor as a writer? And you can also give me the worst one too if you want. Yeah. That made you think, oh, that really helped.
That's hard.
Have you never received a good note?
That's a hard one.
No, we
That's
have to
a hard
know.
one.
You have to dive in there, don't you?
I had a note one time where a producer said, "You're better than this." I don't know if that was a note, but it certainly made me go back and look at it differently. I will say my first foray into comic books was The Falcon at Marvel. And I remember when I turned in my script for my first book, my editor said it was ponderous. And I was like, I know what ponderous means, and I can't figure out a way to make it good. And I didn't really understand what he meant until I saw the artwork back, and it was so many words that you wanted to move the words out of the way to see the art.
Right.
And it made me realize that, A, this was harder than I thought it was going to be, and B, I had to learn to make a relationship between words and art. That it wasn't just about the part that I did, that there was another thing that it's connected to. So I had to learn how to say more with less, and I believe it made me a better writer.
That's awesome. That's super helpful.
Yeah, that
Hurt
was
my feelings, though. Hurt my feelings.
that was actually the exact same note that I had when I wrote my first comic, because I came from TV too, so I'm like, oh, I got to write 40 pages of Rick taking Morty to Banana Planet or whatever the thing is, so like I can write down a comic book, right? And they're like, you know, it's 50-50. Like, you have the art here for a reason. Like, the idea is that, you know, one hand watches the other, like the rising tide lifts all creative ships for this. Like, don't feel like you have to write a novel because that's not what you're doing. And after I learned that, I was like, oh, this makes it so much easier because you have these really, really talented, fantastic artists that have put hours and hours and hours and hours into honing their craft and becoming visual storytellers. And like wanting to work with that in tandem was like the best note I've ever gotten from an editor. And just the weirdest note I ever got was, I think I had like a line where Miles was like, man, you're crazy, B. He's like, is that a typo? Like, what is B? So I just had to explain to him what B meant, but those were my two.
That's awesome.
I think for me it was like learn how to say less. You know, I'm a professor, so I profess like a lot. Like, my wife gives me like time limits. Seriously, like 15 minutes is our goal. Anyway, and I think so I'm fortunate enough, very honored to be creating a new black superhero for Marvel right now, called Ghostlight. You know, it comes out February, and so when I wrote a pitch for it, I wrote a 40-page pitch. I wrote a 40-page pitch for this story because I was like, I wanted to get in there. I was like, I understand this character, and this is what I want to do. And so my editor was like, don't ever do that again. Do not do that again. So it's like about, like, you know, being able to get your concept across quickly, almost like haikus to a certain degree, you know. And so having a good log line is in some ways way better than having like a great like full-blown pitch in some ways. So that's one of the things I learned.
So awesome. So I just remember what mine was. Mine was my mum saying, "You should be a plumber." I was probably my first script I wrote a Microsoft Word doc, and it was 301 pages. I didn't know what I was doing, and I gave it to a producer, a mate of my dad's, and he's like, "I'll do this as a favor." You know, I don't know what I was doing, and he said, you don't know what you're doing, but you're a good storyteller, but this is totally unproducible. This doesn't make, So he gave me some advice. So this is, I'll just share this with you guys. If any of you guys are writers, if you can write essentially, I would say 11 to 15 scenes per act, and write down a couple of sentences per scene so you're not lost in the ocean of the story that you're trying to tell. And if you stumble across a nice piece of dialogue, you can stick it down. So really take this to heart, because this helps me. 11 to 15 scenes per act. Your setup, your conflict, and your resolution. And write down a couple of sentences, what happens in that scene. So then when you go back, and you can cut them out, you can put them on a placard or whatever, what are called flashcards. You can move them around so you don't get overwhelmed with the massive monster of what you're creating. And then I went from this giant, massive, save the world, Narnia-type explosion to a Kurosawa spaghetti western in one town. I went from the world let's just start in a town. And then within that story, the first comic they ever did, to basically what these chaps are saying is, I then leaned into my favorite filmmaker, Akira Kurosawa, and then said little to nothing, and then let the pace of the story dictate what I wanted to say. That was my kind of my lesson. I learned my lesson. You say less and sound more profound with what you want to say. All right, folks. So that's the questions for the panels. So we're going to turn it over to you guys. I believe we have 3 or 4 questions. The lovely lady right there. We'll lean like this and see you. Hello, Donna. Yes. Oh, yeah, you're coming up. Thank you. Yeah.
I thought it was somebody else. Sorry. Hi. Thank you guys for this amazing panel. My name is Lakeith.
Oh, I didn't even see. I'm blinded by the light.
Oh, can you see me? Is it better right here?
Oh, there you are. Yes, perfect.
She has shadow with braids.
Just step. Yeah, if anyone's got questions, come up, wait in line. So I think you had a question too, love. Perfect. Yes, darling.
Okay, my name is Lakeith Adelko. Again, thank you guys for this amazing panel. And I just have a question, especially when you're writing in such major universes or stories that's a part of other stories or other canons of work. How do you normally hone down or pinpoint where you want to start the story from a universal aspect, and where it can also affect other characters in other worlds of a show that may be created or coming out 2 or 3 years later? And I say this for myself. I had the blessed opportunity to work recently in the Marvel space for the Armor Wars. And though I am a Marvel fan, I felt like I had to read and try to figure out every novel and all that. I was like, there's no way. But when we got in the room at the end of the day, it was simply about the character.
Always.
And the showrunner did the hard work, of course, Gasser, of finding out where to go. So normally, how do you pick? Or is it something that you're told where to start from, if it's going to affect another film and so forth? Thank you.
That's a fantastically stressful question, because it's so true. So I wrote on She-Hulk, Attorney at Law, and we were in a very unique space because we were the ones that were creating that character. She had not shown up anywhere else, and she was also so far removed from most of the other Marvel characters because she lives in LA, and most everyone else is in New York. So we were lucky in that regard. So, and also we were a straight-up comedy, so we had the sort of the narrative out being oh, this week this person shows up, and they got to go back to their hometown. So that was very easy for us. But we did have some stuff pop up where originally, the show, so originally we had this very big sort of courtroom arc with Jen trying to get Emil Blonsky, Abomination, Tim Roth's character through this multi-thing trial, and we spent weeks and weeks breaking it, and finally we nailed it. We had this really fun and funny character arc for him. And then one day, our execs were he's going to be in Shang-Chi, so you can't use any of that stuff. It's going to throw everything out. So we're oh, okay. I guess we just wasted a month and a half figuring this guy out. So we had to go back to the board and sort of fix things that way. But there were definitely some stressful moments. But I think for us, because we had like half of the room were straight up comic book people who have used to working in like the multi-universe space, and the other half were just straight up comedy writers. So we had a really good mix of having one fantastic leader and showrunner, Jessica Gao, who is a phenomenal writer and also knows that world like the back of her hand. And we also were sort of lucky in that Feige really liked her take on the show, so we had like a lot of a big blank check as far as like, all right, we don't want to do that. Like Jessica would like get into very funny arguments with Kevin, and she would yell at him and be like, I don't want to do this. And you're like, okay, we're not going to do that. So I think we were very lucky in that regard, but there is like things, I'm sure you can talk to it too, when you're writing like within like a multi-universal stuff where like you have to put things in because it's going to get seeded in 3 years, or it's going to be like a big tie-over event that maybe necessarily doesn't play into what you want to do with like your arc or your characters or anything. But like that's part of the like the trade-off, right? Is that like part of playing in this big space where like anything can happen and everyone can like you said, looking out your window, where like Spider-Man can go for a coffee and run into like the Incredible Hulk. Is that like you sort of have to deal with the things that bump with your story narratively, but. Again, that was my very long-winded answer of saying we were lucky in that it really only messes up a couple of times, but it is something that I think you have to be cognizant of when like entering into that space in that world.
I guess I've been kind of lucky up until this point with, I was thinking of which shows that I've been a part of sort of work with that, and I guess Winning Time, because we have so many different characters, but we are confined to a very specific point in time, so we're really only dealing with, like in season 1, 1979 and 1980, and we know kind of what happened. It's just more of making a choice with what we're going to highlight, and we know we're going to have a Magic Johnson episode and storyline. We know we're going to have a Kareem Abdul-Jabbar one. It's more or less just picking the things. The specificity within that is difficult, like with the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar thing, he had done so much with the civil rights, human rights movement. It's like what to pick from. And it became more of a committee decision, more so than anything else, because the network wants what they want, we want what we want as creatives, and then we need to service what we need to service to get to the next story. So really it comes down to making the best choice possible and hoping for the best. I mean, I think I've seen it done in ways that didn't work out as well. I did a show, American Gods, and, or maybe it wasn't that bad. Thanks. It's where you had a lot of different moving parts and focusing on the main storyline with Shadow Moon and Mr. Wednesday, or like I wanted Anansi to get more love in the show than I think he ultimately got. And to me, that also came down to picking and choosing and who the powers that be at the time, going through your gatekeepers. So it's a long-winded answer to say we just try to get lucky and do the best that we can to pick what we can to make it work.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much again for this panel. It's super informative. Move a little further up. This question is actually for you, Mr. Barnes. I'm going to piggyback off two things you said earlier. The first thing was when your daughters said, where are the girls? I've been seeing that a lot in terms of like adult animation, comics, and graphic novels. So what would be your advice to women of color who are trying to break into like the adult animation industry? And the second part is you said that you had a grandmother who pushed you a lot when you were growing up, and you didn't have a lot of people within the network or people in this industry. What role did mentorship play for you, and how did you find your mentors?
The mentorship thing is a lot tougher than I thought it was going to be, because there's but so many hours in a day. In the beginning, everybody that came to me and said, could you read my script? Could you help me with this? Could you help me with that? I would take it all on, and I didn't have any time. So now I try to, if someone thinks that I have something to offer as far as advice or anything, I try to keep it as succinct to say what exactly. I don't always have time to read every script and do everything, but I try to give everybody something. And I try to also work within opening doors within the world that I'm in, to be able, when I see talented folk come along who just need some refining here and there, I try to open up doors to those types of people, both in my publishing company and in television on my shows. In regards to voices starting your own thing as women, I think it's a great time with indie comics. There's so many different publishers out there, and even self-publishing, to tell your story in your way. And, you know, I hear people say sometimes, well, how do I find an artist? Or if I'm an artist, how do I find a writer? Oftentimes, if you just put your stuff out there and you put yourself out there, you find that there are people like you that want to do the same thing. They just haven't found a you yet. And I know for me, there was a period of time when I had zero, I had no connections to get into business. I just kept going. And I kept putting stuff out there, and I kept making things. And eventually, people, and this was before the internet. This might have been before the telephone. This was a long time ago. And eventually, you know, I found my tribe. I found the people who embraced what it was that I did. And I think now with, you know, the ability to communicate, and, you know, I never would have imagined 25 years ago to be able to sit in front of a group like yourselves and be able to have this conversation. It just didn't happen in the world that I came from. And just comics weren't received that way, and there was no organization. There wasn't a John to help put all of this together. And I think now it's just about putting yourself out there, making things, and keeping your ear to the ground and keeping the faith. I wish I could give it more practical, but that's what it is.
Good afternoon. My name is Carlos Juzang. I appreciate this opportunity and what you've given for us to hear. One of the things I'm asking is your writing. Pitching for film versus comics. What is the advice you would give a person or creative here to go by to making that happen?
Writing a pitch, essentially writing a pitch for a film versus a comic book. What advice? Just did a pitch a couple of days ago, and that was for television, and it was quite a big extravaganza. Prentice went kind of all out, but I would say, for me, when I receive a comic pitch, the first thing I want to see is something small. Don't overwhelm me. Give me the log line, then give me a little synopsis. If I can get a sense of where you want to be, I think this is also true. Even when I was pitching, TV, I felt like this. Okay, to be honest, I'm to be real. It is for me. Is when I pitch you guys at a convention, I give the same pitch that I do in person to the head of a studio. I literally would go, "You're just a bloke in a pair of jeans. I don't care." And here's another trick I do too. I will ask them a question. So the question I ask when it comes to my stuff is this: would you damn your family to save the world? And while they're thinking about that, I go right into, it's a story of a bad man stuck in purgatory. He has 7 days to reap the 7 souls. And then I go from there. And it's really small, and they go, well, and it's funny because in the studio, they're like, well, can he talk to us like this? I don't know what's going on, you know? But I keep it real short, and then I allow the person to then go, I need to know more. And I think if that's in the written word too, when I receive pitches to my company, or in the one we just started with Prentice, Payback, where we're looking for writers, and we do get a lot of submissions, it's like, don't overwhelm us, because it's kind of like to the point where Rodney's saying is like, we have so much stuff being sent and so many opinions being asked. You've got to be able to grab me. It's almost like too in the day and age we're in right now, right? we've got social media, and we've got TV, and we've got all these a million distractions, and we're just also trying to get up out of bed and do our work. You've got to be able to grab me in the first 60 seconds. So less is more. Can you grab me? And that's it. So for me, I don't really have too much of a difference. You know, in person, I just treat everyone like anyone else. Like, you know, they're just a dude, whatever.
Awesome. Well, unfortunately, that was our last question. We're at time. I just want to extend a very, very, very big thank you to Cody, Sebastian, John, and Rodney for this very generous, insightful, and incredible panel. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you again to John for all your work. It's been great working with you. Grab a CAAMCon t-shirt in the back before you leave. And the vendors and food trucks are still outside for about another hour. Thank you so much.